in this video, I'll be sharing with you a tutorial on how to cut this stylish wrap shawl blazer dress. So if this is something you like, kindly hit on the subscribe button. So for this particular tutorial, I'll be doing it on a miniature size. So first, I'm going to mark the shoulder to bust, shoulder to waist, then 7 inches to get my hip point. So I'll be using the rest of the pattern as the full length, right? So next thing is to draw out a straight line on those points, and I'll go ahead to label it as shoulder to bust, waist, hip, and gown length. So what you do is to mark your shoulder divided by 2 plus half, because this dress has a sleeve. Now I went down by 1 inch for the shoulder slope. Here you mark a basic neckline of 3 inches by 1 for the back. So the actual measurement is what I'm mentioning, and the one I'm marking on the pattern paper is just for the illustration. Connect from your shoulder slope to your basic neckline of 3 inches. Next is to find your chest line, which is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, and I'll place my ruler to draw a straight line. Now after I'm done marking that, I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler and mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus half inch on that same chest line, and then rule a straight line connecting all the way up. Now I'm going to divide my armhole into 2. I'll come out by half inch. Here I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4. Then I'll connect from the midpoint of my armhole to the upper part, and from the midpoint of my armhole all the way to my bust circumference divided by 4. Now after I'm done marking the back pattern of this dress, I'll be marking it in form of a dartless pattern. Here I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4 and add my sewing allowance. Mark my waist circumference divided by 4 and add my sewing allowance. Here I'll also go ahead to mark my hip circumference divided by 4 and add my sewing allowance. So at the lower part of this dress, which is the full length, I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4. Now this dress has like a flay effect, so if you mark your hip circumference, you add an extension to 3 to 4 inches there before adding your sewing allowance of 1 inch. So this is a blazer gown and you don't need much sewing allowance. 1 inch is enough. So I'll just go ahead to connect this all the way up, and then I'll connect this from the waist all the way to the hip point, and from the hip point I'm going to extend this all the way to the full gown length. So we are almost done drafting out the back pattern. So what I'm going to do now is to go ahead to cut it out. After cutting this out, we are going to go ahead to create that opening at the back of this dress where you can attach the bow tie at the lower part. So remember, you're cutting your pattern on fold. So from the waistline, you can mark like 2 inches, 3 inches. Opening should not be much. So from here, I'm going to extend this all the way to that opening. So you'll be cutting this out. Now you can cut your pattern on fold and cut this out. If you're going to find it difficult turning the opening, all you have to do is to cut it open into 2 patterns. After sewing, you can go ahead to join it back. Don't forget also to measure the round neckline of the back pattern. You'll be needing it to cut out the front. Now for the front pattern, I've cut out all the measurements I need. Here will be the starting line for the pattern at the front part. So when you're cutting a wrap blazer dress or a wrap dress, you have an extension at the front. That is, for your dress to go over to the other side, you're going to add an extension. So a slim person, use 3 to 4 inches, and for somebody on the plus size, you can go ahead to use 4 to 5 inches. Let's say we are drafting this pattern for someone that is slim. So what I'm going to do is to mark an extension of 3 or 4 inches in front of my pattern. Remember, just like I said, here will be the starting line of my pattern for the front part. The upper part will be where I'll be cutting my collar. From the starting line, I'm going to mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus half. Come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope or shoulder slant. Now, after marking that, I'm going to go ahead to mark a neckline of 3 inches. So this neckline is starting after this extension I have at the front part of my pattern. So let's take this as the 3 inches neckline that I marked out. From there, I'll extend to my shoulder slope. So the next step I'll take is to find my chest line, which is my bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So I'll make a mark there. So just like I said, I'm not using an actual measurement for this pattern, but I'll be in all the steps needed. So what I'll do is to mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus half again. Now connect this all the way to the upper part of your pattern. Now what I'll now do is to divide your chest line, your armhole, into 2 and come out by half. Here you're going to mark your bust circumference divided by 4 at the chest line. Connect from the midpoint to the upper part and from the midpoint all the way to the chest line of this pattern. Now after I'm done marking this, the next step I'll take is to go ahead to start marking my neckline and the dart. So I'll just mark out this basic neckline of 3 by 3 inches. Let's just say this is a 3 by 3 inches. So after marking this, I'll go ahead to mark my darts. So I'm just going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I'll mark this at the bust, waist and hip point. So I'll also extend it to the full blouse, to the full gown length of this dress, sorry. And after that, for my dart, instead of taking ½ inch, I'll be taking 1 inch on both sides. So the reason why I'm taking this 1 inch on both sides is because at the front part of this dress, if you notice, there is a pleat. So what I'll do is I'm going to sew up this dart. That is this dart I'm connecting from the bust to the waist and from the waist to the hip to the full gown length. I'm going to be sewing from the I'm going to sew the upper part, and then for the lower part I'll pleat it to create this fold on the blazer dress. Start my measurement at the bust. I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4 and add my sewing allowance. At the waist, I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and I will go ahead to add my sewing allowance. Now I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4, measure this dart intake, replace it and add my sewing allowance. Here I'll mark my hip circumference. So while marking, it will not extend all the way out. What I'll do is to go ahead to add an extension or a paper to it so that I can draft out that part. So I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and at this point you add an extension of 2 to 4 inches or 2 to 3 inches. So now remember, like I said, at the upper part we'll sew up the dart, and starting immediately after the waistline we are going to leave that dart so that you're going to pleat it to have that pleat effect that we have in front of the blazer dress. Now after I'm done marking this, I'll just go ahead to now add the extension at my pattern and add my sewing allowance. So for the lower part, mark your hip circumference, replace the hip, add an extension to it of 2 to 4 inches and add your sewing allowance. Then I went ahead to connect this all the way down. Now the next step is to cut out the collar area and lapel area of this pattern. Now it's a short blazer dress, so we are not going to have any notch on the neckline. So I'll come up by ½ inch at the waistline of this pattern because that is where the shawl collar started. Now I'm going to go ahead to place this and draw out a slanted line all the way to the neckline of the dress. Now the measurement you have at the neckline of the back of the dress, you're going to mark it all the way straight up at the upper part. So that is why we left that extension at the upper part. Now what you now do is mark the length of the collar, that is the round neckline. So from here I'll come out by ½ inch and I'll connect it back. From this point I'm going to connect how wide you want the collar of the back to be. You can use 3 inches, 3.5. So from this point now I'll start extending this all the way down. Notice this part of my neckline is not blended very well. Go ahead to blend yours. So I'll use my freehand sketch to do this part to draw out short collar blazer of this dress. So I'm just going to go ahead to cut this out. So if I'm not okay with what I have, I'll go ahead to readjust. There's always room for readjustment before placing it directly on your pattern. Just like I said, I'm not okay with what I have here. I'll also try to blend it out a bit. So this is not an actual measurement, so I'll just try my best to blend here out, right? What I did is to just go ahead to reduce the color I have here since we are not using the actual measurement. Now I'll start tracing this down all the way to the lower part.
So from this point, I'll just go ahead to curve this down here. So after I'm done marking this is what I have. I'll try to blend this out so that it will not be too curvy. It's meant to be a slanted straight line, and I'll connect this. So if I'm not okay with what I have here, I'm still going to readjust it. So I'm going to go ahead to cut this out, and this is what I have. So I'm not really okay with what I have. What I'll do is to add an extension to it, but first I'll go ahead to cut out the pattern that I have already. Whatever you have here should be close to the dot line, so I'll just go ahead to trace this out, and I'll add another paper to it and use a tape to hold it down. So from there, I'll now go ahead to readjust these parts this way, and I'll go ahead to draw a curve, then slope it down to the neckline. So just like I said, if you're drafting your pattern and you're not okay with what you have here, you can always go ahead to readjust. You can always readjust your pattern before transferring to your main fabric, right? And for this pattern, this side you're going to cut it on fold, because each side will be overlapping the other side to create the wrap effect we have. So sew out your dart a little to the waistline, and then leave it, right? Leave this part open this way and pleat it down to create that pleat we have in front of the dress. Now go ahead to attach your button. So you'll be cutting out two of these. One will be for this side and one will be going for the other side of the pattern to create the wrap blazer effect on the dress.